Hello everyone and welcome back to Cricket Unfiltered. I'm Menas, I'm here with Paul, and we just have a shorter edition of Cricket Unfiltered than usual because Jaleesa is off this week and we're releasing an interview we're really proud of with Harry Moffat from the SAS, who's written a book. But there are some cricket issues, Paul, that are really swirling around at the moment. I want to talk about Paine's comments from the Chappell Foundation dinner, but I think the hottest topic right now in cricket is what Cameron Bancroft said to The Guardian before last weekend. What do you think?
I wonder whether it has kind of caught him by surprise, because it just seemed like a sleepy interview at the start of an England county season, just a few general chats. I suspect he didn't actually intend for it to cause headlines, and maybe he would have been better served going into it with a set of different answers, because when they said to him, okay, so do you think any of the bowlers knew what was going on? I think you have to be, in his position, very clear about what you're going to say then. He needed to be, if he wanted to have no controversy, he needed to say, look, all I knew was what happened with me. I can't say whether anyone else knew anything. I didn't discuss it with anyone else, and kind of put a hammer on it. He kind of tried to have a bob each way by sort of not saying they did, but the implication was he's sort of saying, well, you know, come on, they must have, is kind of the way that it sounds. Is that how you feel?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And you can imagine we've been at first-class games where it's the atmosphere's quite relaxed. There's not many people around, and reporters can get close to cricketers and maybe press them a bit more than they would normally in a more formal setting around international cricket. So I think you're right, he was probably caught a little bit off guard. Adam Gilchrist said on his show on SEN this morning that Cameron Bancroft spoke to him, and perhaps Bancroft wasn't prepared for the questions that were coming, but he also said that it's always going to be around them, so he should always be prepared for it. I guess he should always have the answers in his back pocket just in case it's brought up.
Yeah, it's tough though. I mean, if you really want to say, look, of course they bloody well must have known, but you can't, there's a human tendency to sort of creep, and he needed someone to advise and say, mate, you've either got to go the whole hog and say it, or just shut it down and go the other way. And so, yeah, he's probably regretting what happened, I suspect.
I mean, for me, this is the opening salvos in the upcoming Ashes battle. That bit of music there from Paul, bit of disco. But yeah, I think this is the opening Ashes salvos being fired from the English press. I think it's the beginning of trying to unsettle the Australian squad leading into an Ashes summer. And fair play to that Guardian reporter. He has got tongues wagging, and I got to say, that's like scoring a quick fire 50 for a reporter, getting that kind of traction out of those comments.
Oh, listen, if someone said that about the Australian media, we'd say, come on, that's not true. This guy doesn't care who wins the Ashes, this England journo. He's just trying to get a good story. He's not... he's not going to go. They're not going to give him a high five and Silverwood give him a shake of hands and well done. It was just, I think you're reading too much into it.
No, I don't think there's an implicit connection between the reporter and the coach. But I mean, nothing does better in the Aussie press than pommy bashing, and vice versa in the English tabloids. They love bashing the Aussies, and this issue is always going to be right for the picking. They picked at the scab, and Bancroft fell for the trap. And the result is it's kind of reignited an issue that was starting to go away. And we'll talk about Tim Paine's comments later about Steve Smith. But it felt to me at the Chappell Foundation dinner that, we were starting to get past Sandpaper Gate. But that might be for us, not for South Africa or England or India. But I have a few comments about what he said. I guess the first thing that strikes me is that when this is brought up, did the bowlers know? There seems to be a lot of people talking about it that have no idea about cricket or have very basic knowledge of cricket. But, you and I did a lot of, deep investigation and reading into what happened in South Africa. That all teams around the world were trying to get the ball to reverse swing. That doesn't excuse the sandpaper at all. But every team had their methods of doing it. Quite simply, things like throwing the ball into the pitch. There's some wicket keepers used to rub the ball on their gloves or rub them between their gloves really quickly. And look, they all had their methods of trying to get the ball to reverse as early as possible. So, of course, the Australian fast bowlers knew that whoever was looking after the ball, David Warner or Cameron Bancroft, was going to be trying to get the ball to reverse swing. That is not in question. And Cameron Bancroft could have almost said, look, everybody knows we're trying to get the ball to reverse swing. But what the bowlers didn't know, well, I don't think they knew, was that they were taking sandpaper out and they were completely flaunting the laws.
Probably that's true, that they mightn't have known about the sandpaper. The question then has to be asked, though, throwing the ball into the ground before it reaches the stumps, there's kind of nothing wrong with that. The umpires might say, come on, lift your throws, but that hasn't crossed the famous line. But if it is true, and there's allegations that maybe David Warner in the previous test match had a very strong, sort of unnecessarily strong bandage on his hand, and if he was rubbing the ball on that and those sorts of things, I suppose there comes a point of the bowlers might have known a little bit more than they've let on. As to whether they knew that it was full-on sandpaper, that's probably going a bit further. But they might have known that the behaviour was pushing the boundaries a bit. And I think
that's a cricket problem, not an Australian bowler's problem.
Yeah, good point.
I think many teams were having that. And the ICC never really clamped down on it. They never had strong sanctions if you're caught tampering with the ball.
Yeah.
It was always sort of a nod and a wink kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's a difficult position to be in if you're the bowler and the ball's thrown back to you and you think, well, that looks a bit interesting. But the temptation would be, well, I'm just here to bowl. And if it just suddenly starts swinging, then that's great. And I have not been involved in it. I'm completely separate to anything that's gone wrong. And Bancroft's answer sort of implies that he thinks that they might have known a bit more than that. And so I imagine he's not endeared himself to the fast bowling cartel at all with these answers.
No, I also think he may have endangered his chances of ever playing for Australia again. And I think he's an idiot for saying those comments. I think he should have been much clearer with what he said. If he wanted to say, look, the bowlers knew we were working on the ball, but they had no idea I had sandpaper and they had no idea I was breaking the rules, that would have been one thing. But to just leave it sort of vague and just sort of try and dance around it, it leaves too much room for interpretation.
It's like, because it was noticeable because the question was asked twice, and then the journo sort of said, we should give him his name. Who was the guy that did it? I've got it here. Journo from The Guardian by the name of, it's a long article, Donald McRae.
Well done, Don. You've sent the first salvo down under. Because remember, the Barmy Army, I don't think will be coming next summer. And I wonder how many actual English journos will be allowed to tour for the Ashes next year. So
that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. Hopefully, yeah.
Going to be very different Ashes summer.
That's true, yeah. But
maybe I'll meet Donnie in the press box. I wonder if he'll wear shoes, unlike other English journos.
But he did ask the question twice, and after he asked it the first time, there was a long pause before Bancroft's answer, and after he asked it a second time, there was an even longer pause, and that's where it sounded like he was thinking on the run, and I think that was a mistake.
Yeah, I think Bancroft has played that awfully. It's a big play and a miss. But as I said, to all those people out there who just want to start to come up with this conspiracy theory that they were all in the Australian dressing room planning this, just not true. The fact is, it was an arms race to get the ball to reverse swing. If you don't think South Africa was doing it in the same tour, you got rocks in your head. They weren't using sandpaper, but they had their own methods of shining the ball. Whether I think back of the wicket-keeper gloves was one of them. So, yeah, I just think it's ignited a debate that really Australian cricket doesn't need.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, now we had Cameron Bancroft's comments. We also had Tim Paine was in the media last week because he spoke at the Chapel Foundation dinner. I was at that dinner, so I got to hear the comments live, unlike some of the reporters who've written articles in the wake of it. So I got to actually hear what Paine said. He spoke about his... What are you laughing at?
I'm just laughing at because it's your SMS to me in the middle of it all when you suddenly said Paine will retire at the end of the Ashes. And I thought... Wow, that's amazing. And I just didn't actually check to see whether that was correct or not. But now it turns out it's not correct.
It's not correct. I was just drawing an inference from what he said. And Tim Paine did not make any equivocal statements during the interview. It was a 45-minute to an hour interview. It was a long-form interview. It was a relaxed setting. It wasn't a media conference. But he did intimate strongly that probably the end of the Ashes will be the right time for him. He didn't give any definitive answer. In fact, he said, you never know, I might be 100 not out in the 5th test at the SCG, which is not going to be at the SCG, which we'll talk about next show. But if he was 100 not out, maybe he'd try and go for another year. But the inference was probably I've got at least 6 more tests in me.
All right, well, listeners, you can judge. He was asked about how much longer he expected to be in the role. At least another 6 tests, he said. And then he said, if I feel like the time is right and we've beaten the Poms 5-0, what a way to go out. But it might be a tight series, or we might be chasing 300 on the last day and I'm 100 not out and hit the winning runs, and then I might go again. So I don't think he's made up his mind.
No, I don't think he's equivocally made up his mind. He said from the beginning of his recall to the Australian side, he just goes series by series. But I think that if it was sort of, behind closed doors when he's, with his family, he's probably thinking end of the Ashes, maybe a bit longer, but I would say that would be when it'll be. So it wasn't equivocal at all. But I did get disappointed with some of the reporting that came out of that night around Steve Smith's return to the captaincy.
So what
was the impression you got from reading, say, Andrew Wu's article or some of the other journos who reported on it?
My impression was that he was asked. See, the problem is I don't care that much about this. I don't care about Tim Paine's thoughts on whether Steve Smith should be rehabilitated as captain or not. So I read it, but I didn't really read it forensically. I think others are more interested in it than me. But what I got the impression was that Paine had sort of said, no reason he couldn't do the job, and sort of gave him some sort of a small tick, as it sounded as though he would say he's definitely someone who should be considered. And then I agree that there was a fair bit made of it that the room seemed to applaud that quite strongly, and that again was made as just to say, well, that's significant because these are cricket people. This maybe gives a guide into how the Australian public is feeling. And again, I just thought, I'm not all that fussed either way. I think that the importance of the captaincy is vastly overstated. I know people like you really, think about it all the time. I don't.
Well, I guess I was disappointed at Andrew Wu's article in the wake of it because he wasn't there for the comments and he heard them secondhand. And I believe Andrew Wu was given clarification by someone who was at the dinner. And then he still went with his article saying there was raucous applause when Steve Smith was discussed as being the next captain.
So we've said what I thought would happen. What actually did happen?
Well, to set the scene, it was a line of questioning from the interviewer, Tracy Holmes, and it was talking about things like being in the cricket bubble and, the fact that Tim Paine had got away from cricket for a while. So that brought a different perspective to the captaincy than some of his predecessors. And it sort of was talking about that issue, and then it talked about whether Steve Smith may have, been too intensely in the cricket bubble in the lead up to Sandpaper Gate, and that was one of the root causes of what led to that behaviour. And then she said, in that line of questioning, not would you prefer Smith over any other candidates, not do you think Steve is the best candidate, not do you think Steve should be captain, but, could he do it, if given the job again. And it was following on that line of questioning about the bubble and the fact that now Steve Smith's a few years older. He's been through that experience. So it was very much a line of questioning that wasn't definitive about who will be the next captain. Should it be Smith over Cummins? And the room did not break out into rapturous
But firstly,
applause.
what did Paine say?
So Paine said he thinks Smith could do the job again. He thinks that he's more mature now. He's learnt a lot. He's always been good tactically, but off the field stuff, he's probably more equipped to deal with it because he's 31. He's not his late 20s. He also made the point that Smith got the job very young. He was 25, 26, which is quite young to be made Australian captain. It was an endorsement of Smith as a person, as a leader, but it wasn't an endorsement over anybody else. He didn't ever mention, I'd prefer Smith to Cummins or anything like that.
And the room didn't erupt.
So the room did not erupt. A few people applauded. Say there's 300-400 people there, 20, 30 applauded.
Right, is that all?
Yeah, it was definitely not rapturous applause.
Because I thought he was like, "We want Smith."
No, not
we
at all.
Want
Not
Smith.
at all. There was a few Smith supporters that clapped.
Yep.
This information was passed on to Andrew Wu that perhaps it wasn't a raucous applause, but he still went with that story, surprisingly. So it was a very, very strange article by him and others. Jai Bednall from news.com.au jumped on the bandwagon. It took Peter Lawler, who was there at the end of the week, to kind of write it properly and give it the sort of context it deserved. So that was sort of the context of the comments.
Okay, interesting. No, I enjoyed that.
Yeah, and I just think that it was made too much of, and Tim Paine would have made a lot more headlines if he'd said, I don't think Smith would be ready for the job again. Can you imagine if Smith had said, actually, I don't think Smith's the right man for the job?
If Paine had said.
If Paine had said that, it would have been front page.
Yes.
If Paine had said, I'd prefer Cummins over Smith, would have been front page. All Paine was doing was paying a teammate some nice compliments, accurate compliments, and it didn't deserve the reporting. And I actually think that it's a little bit crass to report on charity events like that. I think you should actually source your own stories rather than report on that stuff. I know it's good for the charity that it gets reported on because, people might want to be at the next Chapel Foundation dinner. So they're raising money, not explicitly, but it can help raise money for the charities. But I don't like reporting on things that aren't in a formal setting.
Oh, yeah, but I think that's, that's something that's gone. That regardless of the rights and wrongs of the actual reporting itself, just as in a general sense, I think at a charity dinner, anyone speaking would know that particularly when you've got 400 people there, number of journos, lots of cricket tragics, everyone's got access to social media these days. One way or another, anything that's said is going to get out. So I agree, sort of in a high-minded moral sense that things like that should be totally off the record. They're never going to be anymore. It's kind of it's a point that might have made sense in 1986. It doesn't in 2021.
Well, I agree that you've got to expect everything to get out. And Tim Paine said in the aftermath of the dinner that he fully expects what he says in these functions could get reported on. But I think a journalist maybe wants to source their own stuff. You maybe call Tim for clarification. But just recycling quotes from a charity dinner, I don't think's great. And I don't think it's great reporting. And I actually don't think we got the right stories. Like, I think it was inaccurate. But a great dinner. I had a great time at the Chapel Foundation dinner. Tim Paine did not come up to me and get upset at me for comments I made about him. So it was a lovely affair.
Yeah, fantastic. Sounds like it was a great night.
Well, I guess that's our little chat about some of the hot cricket news. We're going to be back next week with a full Cricket Unfiltered episode. There's actually quite a few things to talk about. There's next summer's schedule that's going to look a little bit different to the past. There's squad lists. I know you love squad list announcements, so we'll be going through them. And so, we'll have Jaleesa back in studio next week, but stay tuned for our interview with Harry Moffat. We think it's really special.
Yeah, it's well worth a listen.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll be back soon.